Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to have back on the show for a second time human trafficking, satanic ritual abuse, and Jesuit mind control survivor and whistleblower, writer and author, educator, blogger, inspiration, and one of my most requested podcast guests, Svali. Some of you may know her from her blogs, Svali Speaks, and Svali Speaks Again, or maybe you've read the book she's authored, Breaking Free from Cult Programming and I'm Possible, all of which have paved the foundations for what we know today about cults, trauma-based mind control, programming, deprogramming, secret societies, including the Jesuits, history of the Illuminati, and so much more. Born and raised in a cult group and having experienced horrors beyond comprehension, as you guys have seen through the guests on this podcast, Svali broke free of her cult group several years ago and has been on a quest to share the knowledge that she has learned from personal experience to help set other captives free. There is years of eye-opening information on her blogs, and her books give a very concise and blunt look at the underworld of mind control and the underlying mechanisms to which it is orchestrated and performed. When I discovered Svali's work at the beginning of my own awakening into the world of mind control and satanic ritual abuse, her publications and willingness to be forthcoming about what actually happens in these child abuse systems was instrumental as a podcast host and advocate in helping my understanding of the things my guests would speak about on this podcast. It's extremely hard to grasp the degrees and kinds of evil that exist in the world if you've never experienced it. And Svali has helped break ground for those with eyes to see and ears to hear to begin to comprehend the incomprehensible. I've personally learned so much from Svali, and I'm so honored to have her back for another amazing discussion. The last time Svali was on, we had a fantastic discussion on the history of mind control programming, secret societies, therapeutics, and so much more. I will link that episode below, as well as the links to her blog and books in the show notes, and I encourage you all to go check that out and support Svali's work, as well as watch our last episode. This time around, we're going to do a deeper dive into mind control programming and internal systems, and I hope that you all have a pen and paper ready, as we are going to learn a lot together and hopefully going to get some of your questions answered as well. Before I finish introducing today's guest, I wanted to give just a quick reminder that if you are a survivor or whistleblower who wants to share your story on the podcast, or who wants to share any information privately with me, you can feel free to email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com. I'd also love your support on my Substack, where I'm taking up journaling as an outlet for me personally to reflect on the podcast, my guests, and my advocacy work. And you can subscribe to me there at www.emmacatherine.substack.com. All of my social media links are also in the show notes, and I want you all to know how eternally grateful I am for the love, empathy, and compassion you show to each brave guest on the show. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, woman of God, overcomer, warrior, walking miracle, and someone who continues to help so many break free from cult programming by showing them what's possible. The one, the only, Svali. Svali, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Well, Emma, thank you for having me here again. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Your last episode is still one of the most popular episodes on my channel, and I've had so many people that have wanted you to come back. So I'm really happy that you're here, and it's great to connect with you again. And since I've had you on last, there's been a lot of people that have joined my channel that are a little bit newer. So I thought maybe if you wanted, if there's anything that I left out of the intro, if you wanted to give a little intro of yourself to people, I'm going to open up the floor to you to fill in any gaps that I missed.
Well, I think you did a pretty good job. You made me sound a bit more than I feel, though, honestly, because I'm just a survivor who's sharing from my own personal experiences. And the reason I share what I do is because years ago, when I was starting out on my own healing journey, I was having a lot of memories. I was going to my therapist at the time saying, "Have you ever heard this? Nope. Have you ever heard this? Nope. Have you ever heard this? Nope." And I wanted validation. And that's how I got started with my first blog. And now I'm also writing because I want therapists and prayer ministers as well to know that this is real. And I'm hoping that by sharing my story, people will understand that that mind control and ritualistic abuse are real. And well, that's I also, though, I want to be people to be where I'm sharing my perspectives on my memories from the group I was in. A lot of times people have contacted me and say, well, my memories are different. And my thought is believe your memories, believe your parts, because different groups do things differently. And so if someone is a survivor listening and they say, well, it wasn't done that way with me, you're right. It probably wasn't. But I'm hoping sometimes that when I'm sharing that some of the general principles sometimes can apply in some instances, even if the specifics are very different. And the other thing I'm hoping is to give people hope that yes, it is possible. When I share some of my own programming, it's to share people who are in groups will know, oh my gosh, yeah, that's real programming. And they'll know it's possible to get free. And that's why I do this.
That's amazing. It's incredibly inspiring to me just to see people like you. And, I've met so many more people on my journey that have been taking that initiative to speak out, and every single time it's so selfless, a lot of times it puts somebody in danger to speak out, or it puts them at risk, or, it's even just from an emotional standpoint, very, very hard to talk about this stuff emotionally. So
Yeah.
I think it's amazing that you've stepped up, even before your time, and we're talking about things that have really helped people even today waking up start to understand what they went through a lot better, and one of all the things that I appreciate, your book, there's so much in it, but and it's not an easy read as far as what's in it, but you make it so concise for people so you can go through this and have a very good idea of sort of a general principle of how all of this works. And it's not too overwhelming for people. And so I just want to commend you on all of your work, because I mean, I can't even tell you the amount of people that reach out or that have even been on my podcast and have cited you as somebody that's helped them.
Well, that's great. Thank
And I'm
you.
excited to talk a little bit more about, some stuff today that I think is really relevant for people to know. I'm finding that a lot more people are waking up, that they're being interested in this, and not interested in a perverse way, just in a caring way, where they're starting to realize that this is happening in their communities. And, I get a lot of really good questions from people that I'm definitely not qualified to answer. And I know that you have a lot of knowledge on some of this. So I'm happy that we're going to be talking about some of the programming stuff today. And one of the questions that I've received recently that I thought would be a good place to start is, people have asked, what is a programmer? And then also, what's the difference between a programmer and a handler?
Hmm. Okay, that's a really good question. I'll start with the first part. A pro a programmer, and in cults, they're sometimes called trainers interchangeably, is someone who is trying to cause another individual to perform an expected behavior or to inculcate in them a specific belief. Um, and it can be done through various means, often traumatic, but also through love and attachment. So when someone is a programmer, what they're doing is they're saying, I want to see this result in this person's life. So I'm using the way the cults use it. Okay. So if I'm a programmer, my job is to first assess someone to see where they're at psychologically, emotionally. And that's at any age, starting at infancy and even prenatally. Um, so programmers, quote unquote, are always assessing the person they're working with for their emotional, physical, psychological health, the status of the programming, if they have programming already installed, and then they will give the person an expected belief or behavior or emotional reaction. And they will provide it through various means. They might provide it through technology, through VRs, through high-tech entrainment, and that's a whole other thing, through pictures, through holograms, through so different media, through auditory cues, sounds. And what they will do is I'll give you a very simple programming scenario as an example. Let's say that you want someone to get up in the middle of the night and open their door to a cult member. So what the programmer, when they're first working with a very tiny child, what they will do is they will have created through trauma a part whose job who's kind of like a blank slate. And then what they will do with this blank slate part is they will give them a name like opener. And they will tell them your job is to open the door. And then the programming labs in the group I was in, they're very huge, extensive. They can be elaborate setup. So they might even have a lab that looks like a room at home and a bed. And then they might have, like, even when the child is young, they will say, when you hear 3 knocks on the door, you will get up and open the door and go out. Okay. And so what they'll do is they'll have someone go knock, knock, knock on the door. And then when the child is like a toddler, their trainer will actually walk with them and take them by the hand and take them to the door, put their hand on, show them what's expected, open the door, and then go with the person outside. And when the child does it, then they're given, say, a treat, a piece of candy. And that's the reward. And they will walk them through it as a reward sequence many times first, especially when the child is very young, because they want the child to feel that they can succeed. And so then after a while, then the trainer will step back and the child pretends to be asleep in the bed, and then they'll hear knock, 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 and maybe a certain like musical tone too. And then the child will get up, and if they get up and open the door, then they go with the person, they get the reward, the piece of candy. Now let's say that the young child, after doing this successfully, then maybe a few months later, they'll practice it off and on, weekly, until it's just ingrained in opener. Let's say opener messes up and the door knocks and she doesn't wake up, or the 3 knocks come and the musical tone and she doesn't open the door. She will then be punished. And it could be by electric shock or various means. And then they will split off and create a part called Punisher, whose job is to punish opener if she doesn't do her job. So it's operant conditioning, and it's reward and punishment. And that's a very simple form of programming. So programmers understand child psychology and development very well, and attachment. And so they will use their knowledge to do things like this, to create simple tasks and to teach these tasks and behaviors. Now, let's say you want the child to believe something, a very tiny child, to believe that that if you tell anyone about the cult, you'll go crazy. Okay, let's say that's a very common program. What they might do is first, they like when the child is an infant, and because they start the programming very young, they'll put them in infant seat and show them an example of someone who had memories, and that person gets carted, and they have to watch a scenario where again, they'll have a setup in the lab sometimes, or they'll take them to an empty mental institution, and then they'll see that person that remembered go into an institution for crazy people where they get hurt and raped and all kinds of awful things. And so that little infant is watching the person upset, screaming, saying, "Oh no," and and then that gives a message, oh, remembering is really bad, right? To the baby. And then when the baby is older as a toddler, um, they will actually go through a setup where maybe they'll see something, occult activity, and then they might call out like a daytime presenter, and they'll say, "Do you remember seeing those people come in with that rabbit and cut it?" And at 1.5 or 2, a child might say, "Oh yeah, do you want to tell me about it?" And the person will be acting like a teacher at school or at preschool, and, "Oh, tell me about it." And then the child will talk about it. And then the child goes through the same scenario. They will be said, the teacher will turn on and say, "You're insane. Things like that don't happen." They will then they will take the child by the hand, and then the crazy police come or whatever and take the child off to the institution where she's punished terribly for talking about things that nobody believes. Okay. So those are just two examples of, one is of a behavior and the other is a behavior, but also belief. And the belief is supposed to be, if you tell anyone about your past, everyone will think you're crazy. So, but it's also the behavior of not talking, the silence. You don't talk about this when you go to preschool. So that's what a programmer does. And then the programmer will also, at intervals, they will assess how well the child is doing their program. And the way they'll do is they'll wait a few weeks, and then they'll put the child in the lab, and then they will do knock knock knock, and the tones are supposed to bring opener out, and they'll assess, is this program still working? And so they will assess, which programs are working and which ones aren't. Or they might do a scenario a few weeks later with the child in a fake preschool setting. Teacher, there'll be a cult scenario on the way into preschool, and then the teacher will ask, "Did you see that?" And if the child discloses, they know, well, we need to work on this more. But the child refuses to talk or says, then they know the program is working, and then they'll keep reinforcing it. So that's a very simple description of what a programmer is, and they do this all through the lifespan until people go for regular tune-ups until they're in their 70s and 80s and 90s throughout their lifespan to ensure that their programming is intact in different areas. Now, a handler can be a programmer, but they don't have to be. And sometimes there's some overlap in that, but not always. So a handler will often be the person whose job is to monitor the activities of a person if they're in a cult group and to report what they're doing. They report back. And the handler will often be given by the person's primary programmer's cues to elicit certain behaviors. So the handler will have codes and things they can do to elicit programs or to trigger certain programs to run in the person. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're a programmer. They may have been given those codes and cues by the person's programmers. But often a husband can be a handler, or a wife or a partner. All right, when I was in the group, in my presentation families, we were all each other's handlers. I was my husband's, he was mine. My kids watched and told on me. I told on my kids, because everyone is everyone else's handler in the group I was in the presentations I was in. So when I was, in different presentations, we were each other's handlers because we could also, like, if you're a 3-year-old child, you're not going to have intense codes, but you can say, mommy acted funny, or the programmers will say, well, did mommy say anything? It makes you think she's not happy with coming to the meetings, meaning in the rituals. And, the kid can answer that. But as children get older in the group, they can become handlers. By the time a child is 12, they're considered an adult in the group, and then they can begin handling their parents at times. The roles get reversed a bit. But like I said, often everybody is everybody else's handlers. It might be a best friend is also a handler, or part of that is whoever the person is very close to and has a lot of contact with can be a handler. I know a lot of times people think of a primary handler, but that depends on who you're living with, how many people you live with, and how many people you're extremely close to as well.
Thank you for answering that. That was a great description. One of the things I wanted to ask was, do victims get set up with the same programmers and handlers? Do they have those people for their entirety of their childhood or adolescence and teenage years? Or is there sort of a strategy on switching those out or changing them?
It can change during the lifetime. I can share. I had three primary fathers I loved who were my primary handlers or programmers when I was very young. And I also, Mengele was a primary programmer of mine too during my infancy. And that could be a whole other thing about him. Anyway, and so during my prenatal infancy, these were my primary programmers. But then there were also other trainers in the organization who mentored me and who were trainers as well. So I had a total of, and for different areas, like I had another person who ran the labs after Mengele left, and she became a primary programmer for me. But I also had a father I loved who was over my training as a mage because in the group I was in, we had mages. So he was my mage trainer, and he taught the mage classes. And so he was my trainer there. And then I had, and so these are people I was very bonded to, loved. They were father figures to me and mother figures to me. And then as I got older, though, they changed. Like when I was in my 20s, my twin sister was a top trainer as well. She was on the training. There's 12 top trainers in the group I was in, and she was a top one of the 12 on the training council. So she was one of my programmers. My best friend, like I said, who was 10 years older than me, who ran the lab, she was one of my primary programmers. The father I loved, who was very high in the organization, was also a programmer for many years. And so then when I got even older, like my 40s, as my children rose in the group, two of them became top trainers. And then they became my primary trainers when I was older in my 50s, 40s, 50s. And so it can change because they realize that people get older, and sometimes people pass away. So in the group I was in, you never had one trainer you're bonded to. You had usually at least a dozen who you were very close to and who worked with you in different areas. And that changed throughout your lifespan. As you got older, they would start bringing in the younger trainers to work with you as well.
Thank you for answering that.
Mhm.
As far as actual programming goes, one of the biggest misconceptions I think when, let's just say, somebody who's never heard of this ends up stumbling on this material, and it sounds like all this stuff could be very random. And so it seems sort of unbelievable because this isn't like we're not taught how trauma affects our body fully. We're let, if you go to university or if you go to school and you learn about how your body works and anatomy or physiology or psychology, there's a lot left out of that. And so I understand why that happens. But there's definitely some misconceptions on actual programming and how actually scientific and systematized and orchestrated and very deliberate it is. And I was wondering if you could maybe walk us through. I know that there's so many different programs. I don't expect you to just do a deep dive into all of them, but would you be able to give an overview on what does that look like in the lifespan maybe of a victim in this cult? When does the abuse start and sort of what kind of programs are implemented at what ages and how does that structure look?
Well, I kind of talked a little bit about that during our last interview too. It's like, how many hours do you have? That could fill volumes. In the group I was in, and this was again started by Mengele, he was the one that developed and learned that the best programmer for um, is the birth mother and when the child is a fetus, because the birth mother is the first programmer the child ever knows. And so she's been carefully programmed. She's the one carrying the baby in the womb. She's not necessarily the genetic mother because, of course, the babies are created in genetic labs. They add with DNA. splicing, all kinds of stuff for the characteristics they want. But the fetus is implanted into the birth mother. And so that birth mother is the first programmer that fetus knows. And I'll talk about this first because it's foundational. It's core programming too. So if people want to know, well, how do I work on core programming? This for me was core programming. And so the first few months of life, the first 6 weeks of life, the birth mother will actually attach the baby to her purposely. And she'll say, I love you so much. I'm so glad you're in me. You're wonderful. She'll pat her belly. She'll say how glad she is to be carrying the infant and how the wonderful things the baby will do. But she also will say things like, she'll say, I am the order and I love you. And that way, that little fetus associates the order, which is what the Jesuits call themselves, um, with that love and attachment. And she will also say things like, I am Mother Rome and I love you. And that's another, deal, And so that's another term for the orders, well, in Rome. And so she'll say, I love you. And I know you'll do wonderful things for me because you love me too. So that's the first 6 weeks. There's a lot of that, 6 to 7 weeks. As time goes on, though, then that's when the trauma starts and the first splits are created. And I know that, there's the rituals around the Petri dish before you're implanted, the time you have to wait to be implanted, and that's awful too. And there's a lot of oppression and demonic from the beginning, but fetuses, their little spirits are naturally resistant to the demonic. And I personally believe that a little fetus has come from heaven. Their little spirits come from heaven, into the body, and so they believe God is good. And so the first thing that Jesuits will do, and this again, Mengele developed this as well, is to break the bond with God. So after a couple months, then they will start abusing the birth mother, shocking her, and the baby feels a shock too. And she'll start screaming and she'll say, God is doing this to me. He's allowing me to be hurt. And then they'll do other tortures. And she's screaming, save me, save me. Turn away from this God who can't rescue me and turn to the one who can. And then as time goes on, then what this does is it develops now the fetus knows God is good. So the baby doesn't want to believe the lie. But because of the trauma and torture over days and days and days, which seems like forever when you're a fetus, and the birth mother is screaming, save me, turn to the only one who can save me. It's not the Christian God. It creates a lot of pain and hurt in that little fetus's spirit. They don't have a brain yet. They don't have a mind yet. They can't process things the way an adult does. But their little spirit feels these things. And it's the spirit that starts to get wounded and to wonder, why isn't God saving me? Because the little fetus will instinctively in her spirit cry out, God help. Because they'll even put the birth mother to death and the baby feels it too, and then resuscitate them. And she'll say, Satan, resuscitate me. Your God didn't. And so after scenario like this, the fetus starts to get angry at God for allowing the abuse, quote unquote. And then finally, the fetus agrees to turn away from God. And when the fetus does that, for me, that was the first split. I turned away from God and I agreed to rescue my birth mother because I loved her so much. And when I did that, I don't know exactly how they monitor this, but I know they can monitor the physiological changes in the young fetuses at that point. And I also believe they can monitor using demonic, like means like monitoring spiritually. They can tell when the fetus has split and done that. And there's an enormous despair that hits then. Because the fetus knows, oops, I turned away from God. And there's a huge despair then. It's like a black despair that comes. And then the programmers and the birth mother say, if you accept the spirit, you won't feel the despair. Will you accept it? And so the fetus kind of agrees, because it's in despair. And that's when the demonic spirit comes in and keeps the split separate, because the brain doesn't want to split. Normally the fetus would begin healing right away, but this demonic spirit kind of keeps the division going. And at that point, then it's a spirit of delusion that tells the fetus, you can never return to God now. And that's some of the first programming they do in the womb. And then later on comes denial, and deception too. And so denial will say, well, things aren't so bad, because the fetus has to be able to live with its life, knowing that it's going to be has a manipulative birth mother that's coercing it into doing things it doesn't want to do. So denial says, well, this is just the way life is. And it's not so bad when it is bad, but it protects from knowing that how bad it is. Delusion says God is evil and I had to turn away from him, which is a lie, but that's the way delusion. And then deception says I can never turn back to God, which is a lie too. So that's foundational. And once they can get the fetus to turn away from God, who brings hope and life and healing, and to believe that their only resort is to begin turning to these spirits, then they've got it. And then they can start programming the fetus. And it's often done with the birth mother saying, please do this for me. And so she'll say, will you do this? And it might be like when the fetus is little, it's like, please wiggle towards the light. So the little fetus will wiggle in the womb towards the light, because they'll shine a light on the abdomen on one side, and they'll see if the fetuses are doing it, and then she'll say, oh, you're such a good baby. You obeyed. And then she'll start creating a part called obey me. And this is a core part too. And obey job is to always obey what the birth mother says, always. And so she'll start out by saying, obey me and go to the light. And the fetus does it. She praises it. She says, oh, thank you. I love you so much. But if the fetus does not go towards the light or doesn't do what she says, then there's shocks and pain. And this starts in the womb. So that's how they start the programming. And then the rest of your life, they build on it. It's not funny. I'm just saying, and they'll create a part whose job is to believe everything she's told. And so her name is Believe. And then the birth mother will say, believe me that you want to obey me, or believe me that you want to do this, And so her job, or believe me that the only safety lies in obedience, and she's the one that gives the fetus the 10 commandments that they have to obey all of their life. And these are rules of the order. And that's the foundational core program. And once you have that in place, then once the infant is born, and of course they do a lot more, but I'm just giving you a quick synopsis. Then the birth mother's killed. She's split in two, and I mentioned that in our first interview. And what they do then, and that's to create a terrible guilt in the infant that they cause the birth mother's death because the infant is so evil and all kinds of stuff. But the infant has bonded to her primary trainers by then too, because they're talking to her as well. They'll put like a speaking device on the womb, over the womb, and they'll talk to the baby. So it recognizes their voices. They're like, oh, we're so glad you're here. You're here. And then they build on that foundational programming. And then that's when they start adding other structures. Like in early infancy, they will do things like I'm trying to think of there's so many things they do. They'll start putting in foundational trees. And so the system might look like, and in the Jesuits, they use 3 trees: the tree of life, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of service. Okay. And those 3 trees branch out through the systems, and their roots go down to the subconscious and the deeper brain states. Whereas the highest brain states, like Omicron, it's going to be leaves across the top. And then all of your programming for your cult host, for your different systems, for your presentations will and even your Alice in Wonderland programming is actually a branch of those trees. Okay. Um, that's an example of a structure that they can put in. And then and then these trees will also have guardians. Like in most programming sequence, you'll have the part with the program. You'll have a guardian whose job is to guard the part and make sure that the programming never fails. And it's usually a loved one. The thought that, oh, if my programming ever fails in this area, this loved one will die. So the guardian will often look like a loved one, or can, or again, look like a demonic spirit or stuff like that. Then you also have a punishment sequence where, so that's attached. The guardian will actually be based on attachment. I don't want my programming to fail or my loved one gets hurt. And then the punishment sequences will be, well, if the programming fails, then the trees get chopped down, or the trees get burned, or insects come and, eat up the trees, or woodpeckers come, And so those are punishment sequences too. So you have punishment, but then you'll also have reward. So most programs will have reward sequences of joy, bliss, and the joy, quote unquote, joy of obedience installed, and then the pain of disobedience, or the terror of disobedience. I'm trying to think. These structures, they're going to vary with various groups. I also had structures out on my tree branches that look like a seal of Solomon, and that could rotate, things like that. It just depends on the group and what they want to put in. It's going to vary so much with various groups.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the fact that they have to do this so early, as far as a fetus, that can be really unbelievable for people. But like you said, there are most likely ways that they can measure stuff like that.
Yes.
And then,
Very, very sophisticated technologies, much more sophisticated than we're used to, publicly known.
and so it's like if that's all that a child's known, they're so much more susceptible to it as they're, a toddler and, moving on throughout their life. So I appreciate you breaking that down for us. And to sort of go off of that a little bit, there's obviously pathways that they will put each victim on or child. One child might go into a Delta assassin sort of path, or a sex slave, or an overseer. How do they choose that path? And does that tend to happen at a certain age where they dictate that? Or how does that, how do they sort of maneuver that throughout the child's life and pick those paths for them?
Okay. Well, first of all, I need to preface this by saying that I was generation 3 and of the genetic engineering for the Jesuits. And my generation, because of Mengele and his survival of the fittest programs, a lot less babies survived. So we had to be able to do a lot of things in general, the ones that survived. So you'll see Jesuit agents from the 40s, 50s, and 60s who were born then, who can do a lot of different jobs. And some of the highly gifted children can do a lot too. At the same time, what the trainers will do is when the in the womb, starting in the womb, and also after the fetus is born, they'll do what's called profiling, and they will test things like, what colors does this baby seem to like the most? What soothes this baby? Is it a pat on the back? Is it being held? Is it being rocked? They'll assess, what does this baby reach for the most when it's offered different toys? What sounds does the baby like? What sounds does the baby not like? And they're always assessing. And then and then they'll see, what does the baby seem to do well? Is this an active baby that likes to, like jump up and down in its crib and play? Is it a playful baby? Is it a naturally really outgoing baby? Is it a thoughtful baby? Because people have all kinds of different personalities. So they'll profile the personality and the skills and abilities at an early age. Now, all children in the Jesuit order are trafficked. That's part of your training. So no one escapes that. Okay. It's not like, well, you're on this track, so you don't have to go through it. No, everyone has to go through it and go through intervals. We all had to be auctioned off at those sex parties and things that they send children to. We all had to go through the sexual abuse, and we all had to help make porn movies and teach other children to do that. So that's just part of the standard training, because you have to, because it's a big money maker and you have to understand it. So I can say everyone, all the children, I don't know if I call them sex slaves, I call them more trafficked. They have to go through their trafficking protocols and learn how to do this and how to please adults. Your sexual training starts when you're an infant. The adults come in and they stretch the babies, and with different objects until they can accept an adult, very young. They will come in and they will split off parts and teach them to associate sexual arousal with torture so that they can do S&M and please those clients. They teach them how to do different sexual acts. So all the children, infants went through this training, and toddlers, we all had to. And that's just considered par for the course. It's part of your training. It's awful, but that's what it is. And all the children learn how to do programming to some degree. Now, some are more skilled than others. Some are better scientists, and sciences is a good background if you're going to be a programmer to understand human neurobiology, physiology in the brain. But all the students, we went to school hours every day, and so all the children by the time they're 12 are very skilled, accomplished programmers. But the ones that like lead the labs and things were the ones who excelled in that area as well and showed exceptional ability and also exceptional analytical skills, because it wasn't just looking at how's this person responding. It was looking at all the data and coming up with critical evaluations and judgments of what would be best for this person. What would not be good? When do our agents need a rest? When are they looking tired? When are they looking stressed? Who can replace so and so? Who would be the best replacement here in this situation? All of the agents go through some level of assassin training. We all had to be able to do it. But then we had a group called the Vatican 33, and that was our 33 top assassins. And they were the ones who were especially skilled. But everyone could do it. You could send any Jesuit agent out and they could do an assassination. But our very best were part of the 33. And those were the ones you would send into a very politically sensitive situation, to do a high profile or high level one, or where you have to have exceptional abilities to get in and out of a place, that might have high security, things like that. I mean, I had to do my first mission when I was 3.5. They start their children very young.
Oh my gosh.
I'll share a little bit about it. It was in Germany, and it was at a nightclub, a very high end nightclub. And I remember the man was playing piano, and I went up to him and I just stared at him, batted my eyes as I've been trained, and looked at him, and then I told him the words I was told to say, which was I said, "I don't have a daddy. Will you be mine tonight?" And he took me up to his room later, and I've been trained. I had a sedative I put in his drink. He didn't know it. Who's going to think a 3-year-old's going to do that? He took it. He was sedated, and I had to take a pin out and put it through his heart. But then I went down the hall. Then I knocked on the door, and my Uncle Lou was there. That was his name. That's not his real name though. And he got me and went to the room to make sure the guy, that that was successful, and took the pen and changed my clothes and put a wig on me. And we left together, and we, I was speaking German at the hotel. I was a dark-haired German girl, but I left as a blonde-haired little French girl in French clothes. And Uncle Lou took me outside to the car, and there was my French host family, and they took me with them on the train. We'd been on vacation. We were crossing the border back into France. And that was my first mission. And they'll do things like that. They start you young. And people don't understand that these groups start their children very young in their training. And of course, when I got to France, then they took me to a safe house, and the fathers I loved were there, especially the main one. And he debriefed me and held me and told me what a good job I'd done, and what a good little girl I was, and how proud he was of me, and how he loved me, and how I made him proud. So they did all of that afterwards. And it's hard looking back on things like that. I eventually became captain of the 33 when I was older too. And that's, I said, in my generation, we had to be good at a lot of stuff. You didn't just have one job. So I helped to oversee the training, and you had to be a crack shot in the 33. You had to be able to take a rifle and hit a fly swing at a long distance. I'll just put it that way. And you had to be cool and calm under pressure. And so I started out when I was 16. I was 32nd, and then you move your way up. So that by the time I was in my late 20s, I was captain. So I was very busy when I was younger, because I was doing that. I was helping to run the labs, and I ran the labs as a trainer. There's a lot of different jobs that my generation did. My daughter was generation 13, and she was very busy too, but not quite as much, because they were able to specialize a bit more. But yet very versatile. All my children were very versatile and could do multiple jobs as well. And then now they're up to generation 23. And these are super agents with, almost super strength because of the genetics and the high intelligence. But as I'm talking about this, I want to address something else, and that is healing the emotions attached to these kinds of memories is the longest, hardest process sometimes too. Because a person can get in contact with their system, their parts, and the reason I learned about my first mission was my part said, you did this mission at this time. And so I went to the part of me that did that first job, and I had to take her hand. And I'm going to be honest, I was horrified, because my presentation was programmed to be absolutely horrified of my parts, to be terrified of coming near them. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I went and I held her hand. And I said, I know you never really wanted to do this. And she started crying. And as she's crying inside, I'm crying on the outside. The tears are coming down. And I said, God, I'm so sorry I did this. And I asked his forgiveness, the true God's forgiveness. But then, the guilt of knowing that, because then I got a flood of memories from other parts attached to the 33, because my captain of the 33 had, was talking to me, and memory after memory, and it was like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. I had to do that and that and that and that and that. I can't take it, feelings. And so I was telling a friend of mine at that time, I said, I'm so overwhelmed. I feel like I'm going to go nuts with all these memories hitting, and all the guilt, knowing that I did these things, these awful things. How can I survive knowing I did these things? And my friend said, first of all, remember God loves you. And then he said, also, it won't last. These feelings won't last forever. Most intense feelings will only last for 3 or 4 days. This was a friend of mine who was a survivor who had completely healed. And so I took his advice seriously. He said, they'll probably peak in about a day or two, and then they'll start to diminish, but you'll make it through the feelings. You'll make it through if you just sit with the part, sit with the feelings. Don't run from them. And then just realize that this was not your fault. You didn't want to do it. You were forced to. How old were you when you did this the first time? And I remember I was crying. I said, yeah, but I was a teenager. The other times I was in my 20s and blah. And then he said, and it helps to have friends you can talk to when you're processing feelings. It helped me, and it helped me to have therapy and prayer ministry as well. And so then my friend said, yes, but it started when you were tiny and you never knew you had the choice to say no because you were forced when you're little, and that's all you in these parts knew was to do the job.
That's exactly.
And that helped me. I mean, it took a while. I'm not going to say like, whoa, okay, I feel great. No, it was like I was a weepy mess for a long time and a guilty mess for a long time. But gradually it started to dawn on me. I was coerced, manipulated, and programmed into doing things I did not want to do. That's why they have to program people because people aren't going to naturally go around doing this stuff. Nobody wants to do it. So that's why they create parts of that's all they know, because then they don't know there's an option of doing anything else. And then I sat beside the parts and I said, you know what? There's more to life than this. Do you want to sit with me while I have toast for breakfast with jam and see what that's like? And the little 3-year-old was like, yeah, I guess. What's jam? You know? And then and the older parts would be like, they were more like, oh, your life is so boring now. I hate it. Oh my gosh, you have no life at all. We get to go over the world and we got to travel and we got to see people and we got to meet with, high level people and do this and this and this. And now all you do is sit in this blank house and read and pray and do your work. What kind of a life is that? So then I had to deal with the boredom feelings, as they came forward, and I said, you know what? But was it worth it? Was it really worth it? Yeah, you had an exciting life. Yeah, you got to travel. Yeah, you did this. Was it really worth it knowing what we had to do and the price we had to pay for that life? So there were a lot of feelings that came out during my healing journey. I don't talk a lot about that in my blog because my blog is, I just want therapists to know this stuff really happens. But it's so important to deal with the feelings, the body memories that come up. Oh my gosh, I'd be a rich woman if I had a penny for every body memory I've had in the last 20 years, of various types. Um, I'll give one example. One of my amnesia lines was actually a sexual arousal line because when you're in a state of high sexual arousal and orgasm, your brain will automatically create an amnesia around whatever you were doing before that and after. So that was an amnesia barrier. Can you imagine when I got in touch with that? It's like because the only way the memories would come forward, I would be feeling that. And it was like 100 in a minute. And I'd be like, oh my lands, and I had to struggle in my presentation with guilt, shame. Why, why is my body betraying me? But then I realized I didn't do this to myself. Somebody else did it to me. And they did with tech. It's high tech stuff. They can just hit that center of your brain over and over. They can, or they can do other things too. They can do it as well in other ways, but that was one way. Or they can give you drugs that create that. And so that's where I had to process the feelings, work through realizing this is not my shame. Shame on them for doing that to me. It's not my fault. Um, no, I'm not this weird lust-driven, person. I'm dealing with programming memories. This is what was done to me. That was then. And now let's feel the table. I've talked to my parts. Let's feel this. It's not happening now, guys. And it's okay now to see and to let it just work itself out. And it did. It took weeks. Very uncomfortable few weeks, but it did. So processing emotions and feelings and body memories of torture and pain, of grief, of betrayal, of absolute rage. Oh, the rage I felt at the people that had betrayed me all my life. Uh, I, I mean, I wanted to go get a gun and get back at them at one time in my life. I had to be physically restrained from someone who said, if you go back and shoot that person, you will be accessed and you will get hurt. Do you really want it that bad? Revenge that bad? Those are the kind of intense feelings that are normal when you're healing. They're tough, and that's where it can help to have a safe outside friend, if possible, to talk about it with when they start coming up. I finally contracted not to go shoot that person, but it took a while. And that's part of the journey too, that I think it's important to address as well. Not just the programming, but the feelings that come up when you start getting in touch with your programming and you realize that this person that you loved all of your life hurt you and lied to you and betrayed you and manipulated you. And then and then you get the memories of when you were the person lying, hurting, betraying, and manipulating your own children, your own loved ones, and others in the group. Because that's what trainers do. They lie. They don't know they're lying. They're sincere. They think they're doing a good thing. When I was a trainer, I thought I was doing the right thing. I really believed I was doing a good thing. But now looking back, I realized I was deceived. I was terrified of Satan. I was terrified of, disobeying. And so I taught those I trained the same things that I'd learned. And so then I had to deal with the tremendous guilt and shame of realizing I'd become the one thing I never wanted to become, like the people that abused me when I was young. And that's part of the emotional processing too, is dealing with these emotions, and they're hard emotions. This isn't a 1 or 2 day or 5 day processing. This took me several years to work through that kind of guilt and shame. And to acknowledging, okay, when I did that, I really did not know I had another option. When I did those things, I really didn't know that I could choose something different. And so as part of forgiving myself is realizing, now I can. And that's why I'm out. That's why I won't go back, because now I can choose. And I want that freedom to choose. And I have to forgive myself in order to heal and not stay stuck in this. Because if I don't, then it's just going to keep driving my programming. So I had to keep working on healing and forgiving myself. Because self-hatred is a big, big thing they use to drive amnesia and division between systems. Okay, I've been talking for a long time.
No, I really appreciate you explaining that. And I love that you had said, put it in the perspective of looking at how old you were whenever you were doing these things. I had a guest that said something that I'll never forget. And she said, I had to tell myself that if there happened to have been an intervention at, say, a satanic ritual, and people actually came to break it up, to arrest people, to stop it, and they saw me there as a little child, they would feel so bad for me and realize that I was a victim. I wouldn't be arrested. They would understand that I was a child being coerced. They would arrest the adults and realize that the adults were putting children in danger by training them to do horrible things and forcing them to do it against their will. And that's a really powerful way, in a sense, to take that power back, because I can't imagine those emotions of that self-actualization of receiving memories of stuff that you had no idea that you did at an older age, and then having to realize that, maybe you thought you lived, a fairly innocent life and went to school and
Hmm.
did things that, were productive and healthy and nonviolent, sports and, normal recreational activities. And then to find out on the back end that there's these horrific things that happen, how do you contend with that? And I love that you're giving tools for that, because I know that so many people suffer with that, whether they've went through this horrific trauma on the degree that you have, or even just growing up in a, sort of more common dysfunctionality within a family unit, parents may be fighting or divorce. Children are really apt to taking responsibility and feeling that loyalty to their parents or to whoever their guardians are, and to feel that you're
Hmm.
betraying people as a child can hurt so bad, because children already sort of take that blame in a way. They don't have that ability to discern, oh, well, mom and dad are fighting. That means that there's something between them. Like children think, what did I do? And
Hmm.
that's really hard as an adult to come to terms with that. So I appreciate you touching on that, because that's something I know for sure people that listen, comment on, is that they do struggle with contending with that guilt, and to realize that that's not a process that just happens overnight. I hope that that's relieving for people, to expect that a whole lifetime of pain is just going to be fixed in a few days. It's almost like gaining, 400 pounds and then expecting overnight to lose it, like there's a process to healing our bodies and our souls and our hearts and ultimately our trauma, so I really appreciate you touching on that, Svali. And I
Hmm.
wanted to ask, you had mentioned the systems that exist within a mind control victim. Would you be able to explain what an internal system is, and how do I say this? How it's dictated, the design of it, and sort of, I guess, the structure. I know it can be different for everybody, and like you said, in different cults or different groups, it might be different. But would you be able to explain maybe how that process worked, either in your own case or within your cult?
In the group I was in, the core was split into parts that held what are called primary beliefs and primary emotions. And so, for instance, around the core, there might be like you would have three prime emotions, which might be mad, sad, and terror. And then with that, you might have love, joy, and peace, which are the reward emotions. And around the core, too, there would be pairs of dyads or two. So like next to the core, I might have like two parts, and one part would believe I am the great evil, and I have to keep the core inside and never let her out because I'm so evil that if she ever came out, the world would be destroyed. And she held that belief because when you're a tiny baby, they call the core out and the diet, that part of the diet. And the programming said, the stars fall down. They're not really, but they and they do. And the whole set shakes and there's earthquakes and everything turns black. And so that part of the diet thinks that the core is so evil, she has to be kept inside at all costs. But the other part of the diet is the one that says the outside world is so evil, I have to keep the core in to protect her from the evil of the outside world. And you can only imagine the setups they do to teach her that. Okay, so that might be one dyad going on. Another dyad might be, I'm trying to think. Oh, one dyad will say, um, my only safety is in complete and utter obedience. And then the other part of the diet, and so therefore, the core must always, the systems must always obey to protect the core. And then the other part of the diet might say something like, would be more like, I have to reward. I have to have a reward and reward the core when she's good. So there's going to be different things like that. You're going to have that. And a lot of times the birth mother has modeled this. She'll be loving and gentle and rewarding on one side, and then punishing and angry on the other. So everything is good, bad, right around the core. These dyads, they have opposing, conflicting viewpoints and reasons. And the reason they put them together is that conflict actually keeps the dissociation and amnesia going then. Because if you have an internal conflict like this, like I'm so evil, I can never interact with the outside world, which is what one part of the core protectors hold. And then the other part is the world is so evil, it'll destroy me if I go out in it. Well, then that conflict is going to always be keeping your emotional energies going so that you never reach your core, supposedly. Okay. Um, Another dyad might be, I love my birth mother so much, I want to do whatever she says. And the other dyad might say, I hate her so much, I want to destroy her. Okay, so a lot of your emotional conflicts are going to sit there. Around these parts, though, too, you're going to have things like in my system, then I have like these tunnels that go down to like a high security memories. And there's 6 of them radiating out in a spoke. And then there's this rope that goes down from the a ceiling, and the rope's made of human flesh and blah, blah, blah. And so each of these tunnels has a guardian, and like one is Anubis, for instance. So in order to get to him, you have, the trainer would like call out Anubis, and then Anubis would also require sacrifice of a heart, because and then a code, and then you could go through that tunnel and go into those memories. Or another part, and this is deep in the system, these are the high security memories. Or another part of the system might be like Methison was his name. He looks like an ancient old gnarled guy, and he wants a skull and a brain to eat, and his code. So those are memory guardians. Well, then you go outside of those, above those, and through them are the trees in my system. I mentioned the trees, the 3 trees, the tree of life, which is Althea, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is Gnosis. And Gnosis is also the keeper of what I'm allowed to know or not know, supposedly, and then the service tree. And the service tree's job is to believes that the greatest service she can do is to Satan, which is to destroy mankind. Well, the roots of the tree go into the inner systems. The roots are the parts that never interact with the outside world. So those are going to be parts that are like their job is like internal punishers and programmers, internal communicators, internal parts whose job is to ensure that things are working well internally, system checkers and things like that. Parts whose job is to monitor beliefs and thoughts inside. Those are going to be in the root system. But then the parts that interact with the outside world are going to be the branches of these 3 trees. Okay, and so that's where your presenters are. That's where your cold host interacts with the outside. That's where, different parts that interact with the outside world also live, is in the branches. So the branches represent the programs, and then the leaves will represent the parts. But also within the trees, and above the memory voltage areas is going to be the delta system that has a ground control and all of that. And they also hold memories that's like a huge computer system. And then they also hold files, but that's further out in the system. And then they hold like the presenter memories and decide how to classify it, how to store it, how to file it, and things like that. So it can get pretty complex. So when you say describe, well, I mean, which part of my system? My Alice in Wonderland system has numerous areas. It has areas where the parts speak French. for my French presentation, because Alice is presentation programming. It's a place where the presenters stay when they're not out in the outside world. My German parts speak German in the German section. The Italian parts speak Italian in the Italian part of Wonderland. The Russian parts speak Russian in the Russian part. The Israeli parts speak Hebrew. And so there's different sections of Wonderland, but Wonderland's job is to hold the presentations in their areas and to keep them happy when they're not out presenting. And so around Wonderland, there's a huge like abyss or cliff. And so the parts were programmed to believe if they ever stepped out of Wonderland, they'd drop into the abyss. And around that, there's just utter darkness and blind terror. So they had to work through some of this and to realize it's okay to cross out of Wonderland and not just stay there. Things like that. So it just depends on the part of the system as far as what programs you're going to see. I know I make it sound pretty complex. It is, because you have to realize kids have a very creative imagination. They can install a lot of programming in when you're young, before 5 years old, especially when you're in a facility your first 3 years, and then you are only out, leave the facility for a few months a year, and you're there 10 months a year. They can do a lot, and they do. Other programming structures look like, I have an internal mage council that represents external mage council at the Vatican. There's 12 mages. I've got an internal Vatican council, and those look like the fathers I loved growing up, and they've changed. And so now they look like the current, well, not the current fathers, but the fathers about 14 years ago. I had an internal Black Pope, and he holds a lot of power inside, or did. I've worked with him a lot. And so he, I have, I, I have an internal structure that looks like parts of the Vatican underneath. I have a Satan throne inside, and I have internal Satan, next to the core, and he's sitting on a throne and expecting all kinds of obedience and stuff. Well, and then I found out that my parts are going in once a day and doing internal sacrifices to Satan to keep the programming refreshed. So that had to get stopped. Imagine how I felt when I found that inside. And I was like, I don't think so. And the parts are, well, if you don't, then you will experience the wrath of Satan. And that was pretty intense programming to work through. Let me tell you, let's just say that was a little green for a few days, and I didn't work very much for a few days while I was working through that one. And so those are just some of the structures. I'm giving a real brief overview because there's a lot of them. It's a pretty complex. I have internal hell. And all my parts believe that if they disobeyed their programs, that they would go to hell, that they would descend and lose their mortality and go to hell. And there were 7 levels of hell. It's not Dante's Inferno. Dante had 9 levels, but the Jesuits gave 7 levels, and that was plenty, trust me. Because the bottom level was utter darkness, where it's just black, and they use isolation tanks and later negative sound rooms to install the utter darkness. And that was the worst level of hell. And so had to work through that. So I guess I'm giving a real quick 5-second overview of different systems.
Thank you for that. I've had a couple of people on my show mention just a structure that they had inside, and I received a lot of questions about it just because it was breezed over so quickly. And people are like, wait a minute, what do you mean that there was a whole city inside of you? So it helps to understand that there's a reason for that, and that's part of the compartmentalization. And like you said, these are children that they are getting to use their minds to help create that within them through their imagination, and so that makes total sense. And I appreciate you sort of explaining some examples of those structures. I know it can be different for everybody, but that's definitely some information that I think can be very new to people learning about this. And even some survivors are like, hey, wait a minute, what do you mean by that? People that are sort of just discovering that they went through this. And I wanted to ask you, I got a really good question about sort of parlaying off what you just were talking about discovering these different systems, these different parts that have these different roles, these different ages, different responsibilities. Somebody had asked, I'd love to hear the first steps when parts begin to talk and show things on the inside. Um, Examples of how that process begins and what alters come forward to stop and how I can work with them. Um,
Okay. That's a great question. And that probably have to be our last one because I know I've been talking for a long time.
Absolutely, yes.
I'll share a little bit of my own journey. Um, I first discovered I was dissociative years ago in 1992. And it's because I had gone for prayer ministry and suddenly I had a full-blown abreaction and I didn't know what was happening. And I started because as soon as the words were out of my mouth, Jesus, I command the demonic to go. I ask you to be here. Those words were hardly out of my mouth when I went into the corner of the room, crouched up, put my hands on my head, and started screaming, "Why are you hurting me if you love me? Why are you telling me you love me if you're hurting me?" And I had the full blown and I remember afterwards I said, "Am I losing my mind? What is this?" And the prayer counselor said, he was a deliverance minister. He said, "I don't know what this is, but it's possible you have some trauma because this isn't normal during deliverance." And I said, "Oh, okay." Well, I went home and that night I started to get memories of being sexually abused as a child by my father. And that's what came that night first. It was like, and I remember I was doing dishes. I was married, and with my kids at the time, and I started taking a plate and I broke it, cracked it in the sink. I said, "I hate him. I hate him. I hate him." Because the feelings were coming out too. And then I broke another dish and my husband came, "What are you doing?" I said, "I hate him for doing that to me." "Doing what?" And I said, "I can't tell you right now, but it was horrible." I didn't, and then I went in my bedroom and I started beating the pillow and screaming, "I hate him, the bastard." Well, then that started coming out. But then the next day, I was getting ready to go shopping when suddenly I started hearing chanting in my head. And in my head, I could see people in black robes swaying and candles. I went, "What the blank is this?" And I'm thinking, "What the heck?" This is 2 days after I tried to go for deliverance. And this is coming up. So I called my pastor and I said, "I think I'm losing my mind because I'm seeing these people in hoods and they're chanting and there's this altar and this can't possibly be real. And so I have to be, having delusions. What is this?" And my pastor said, "I'll come over." And he came over. He said, "I have no idea what this is." But he said, "I'll be praying for you." I'm like, "Okay, that's good."
Thanks.
Yeah, yay. Prayer, great. Didn't help me feel calmer. So then I thought, I need help. So I called the deliverance minister and he knew of someone who did deliverance ministry who had worked with trauma. And so I called this guy, but I thought, I'm a nurse. I want a real counselor. So I called a couple places and I made appointments to see if I could see someone who could help stop this flood of memories that was coming into my head. I was just seeing the rituals. Well, now I know there were rituals at the time. I just saw candles and black hoods and people in a circle but they were saying awful things, hail Satan, stuff like that. I thought, "Oh, this looks like nothing I've ever heard of." And so over time, I saw some therapists, and basically, one said, "Well, you're not dissociative because you're too high functioning. You couldn't be a nurse and a mother and doing all that you do if you're dissociative. So we can rule that out. So I don't know what this is, but you're having some PTSD." And I thought, okay, well, let's fix the PTSD. And so I started telling about some of the things I remember, and then I'd be having full-blown reactions in this office and remembering. Parts were sharing with me their memories. They were showing me with my body, which was a little disconcerting, you know. And that's how they start sharing. So I got a journal then, and I started drawing pictures because I found a book then by someone named Jim Friesen called Understanding the Mystery of MPD. And while I didn't think I was multiple, I thought, well, maybe some of his ideas on healing trauma would help. And he talked about drawing a house. So I drew this house. And when I drew the house, it had 3 levels and a basement. And there were all kinds of infants in the basement. And then there were children of various ages, and then teenagers and adults. And then I'm going, what's this? Because he said to draw what's inside of you. And that's when so I think it was through journaling, parts started drawing pictures of what was going on inside. And they started communicating with me first through my journaling. And then later on, let's fast forward because I went to therapy and started showing my journals, and I had some good therapists and I had some awful therapists. I had one therapist who said, oh, everyone goes through what you did. My brother tortured an animal in front of me, and this is normal. And losing time and when you're angry and not remembering things, that's normal. And that was the Christian counselor for Rafa at the time in the big city I was in. I was like,
Oh,
I'm not going back to you. And another therapist wanted to hypnotize me, and no, absolutely not. He was creepy. And so finally, after several years of this, I couldn't really see inside. But when I journal, parts would draw pictures of themselves and with balloons, like cartoons, and show me what they were thinking. But then over time, as I did more work, and especially as I found external safety, that's when they started to really open up. Then I could see them inside. Then I created a healing team, and we would join hands and go and find parts inside and start talking to them. But that took finding external safety, and that took years, and that took a lot of journaling and working inside first. I hope that answers the question.
yes, it does. All that stuff is really helpful. Healing obviously is everything after you remember everything. You have to try to figure out what to do with all of it. And so that's super helpful. And I love the writing. That's been something that definitely I've seen time and time again has been very helpful for people, is to put a pen in your hand or a pencil or whatever, and just not talk about it and try to communicate what's going on inside a different way,
Yes.
and drawing, writing, that seems to be a huge way
Hmm.
or catalyst in a sense for people who might get stuck trying to find words for it.
Hmm.
So I appreciate that. I'd love for you, I know that you had a resource that you wanted to share, and then obviously I want you to tell people where they can support you, as well.
Um, well, the resource I wanted to share is some friends and I wrote a book several years ago. I actually did more editing, but I was consulted on it. It's called Finding Freedom: Helping Survivors of Ritual Abuse and Mind Control to Heal. This was actually written for prayer ministers and even Christian therapists and it was written out of the fact that sometimes I told you I had all kinds of experiences with Christian therapy. I had Christian therapists that wanted to do deliverance, and my parts would come out and say, "We are Legion," and they'd be laughing at the therapist. you know? Or I had one pastor who tried to do deliverance on me, and a child part came out, and he said he was trying to command that self-feeding spirit to go away. And the older part came out to him and said, "No, actually, that's a dissociated aspect of my personality. That's not a demon, and you can cast all you want, but she's not going to go away." And then the pastor turns to me and says, "In Jesus' name, I forbid you from trying to teach me." I thought, whoo, real experience. So there's some real not so good things being done in the name of prayer ministry and deliverance. And so this book was written to help people understand a bit more about trauma, mind control, programming, and some of the things I've been touching on today, and emotional healing and different aspects of healing that are really good to understand if someone is going to work with survivors. Or that's what I believe anyway, from my own experience. I've had some excellent prayer ministry. I've had some terrible prayer ministry. And so this book came out of the desire to help people understand mind control better and programming better. And then another book is Prayer Warriors 2, and that's a prayers for healing from ritual abuse and mind control. And that also it's a resource for prayers if someone is a Christian. It actually discusses a little bit about programming and then offers some prayers to work on it. But this is not a just quick renunciation prayer. These are some things that talk about some of the issues to pray about and to think about as you're looking at different things. Okay, so it might be things like how to address unforgiveness, or a prayer for developing new relationships outside of the cult. That's a biggie because that's a tough thing for a lot of people when they're getting out. Prayer to address programs, roles, and jobs of the Christian front parts, because the Christian parts sometimes are the most programmed and can sabotage the system. So different chapters address different things. So it could be a useful resource as well. Okay.
Thank you for that. And then your book also is on Amazon, your
Yeah,
book.
it's not impossible. It's called It's Not Impossible. And it's about breaking the chains, getting free from ritual abuse and mind control. Yep.
And then your blog, that is, do you want to give people the address to that as well?
Yeah, that's wordpress.swallyspeaksagain.com.
And I will have all of that linked in the show notes. Is there anything else that you wanted to close with, Svali?
Well, I think I've covered a lot so far, a whole bunch.
You did. And I'd love to have you back again sometime. You're a wealth of knowledge and you take really complex ideas and make them simplified, and you do it very gently. So I appreciate that with you, but at the same time, you're very honest about it, and like I said, from my own journey, you've been instrumental in me understanding things that are just so out of the realm of even where my own imagination can go. And stumbling on your blog and finding your book and being able to learn from you has been so helpful for me to do this podcast to where I'm not stuck in the moment all the time trying to have empathy and trying to put myself in somebody's shoes and say, what does this mean that they're saying? I can sort of sit back and relax and do that naturally now. Because even though I can only understand it from a limited perspective, your work has really helped me just be able to take a deeper look at it in a way that I wasn't able to conceptualize before. So I really appreciate you, Svali, and I encourage everybody to go check out all of your resources. Your blog is just a wealth of information. You have so much on there. Extremely helpful. Again, I know it's your experience, but there's a lot of crossover that goes from different groups and different methodologies and techniques. And your book is amazing. It's a great, concise way to understand a lot of really hard things in a very short amount of time. So I'm going to link that below, everybody. I'll have all my social media links too. Keep in touch. I never know when I'm going to be deleted or terminated off something. I don't like putting that out there, and I pray over that all the time, but it's happened over and over again. So I appreciate when you guys can keep in touch across multiple platforms. So I'll have all that below. And you guys, thank you so much. We couldn't do this without you. I'm so grateful for all your support and love that you guys have to each guest in each episode. Share, subscribe, like, comment, and just help get the word out with this as much as possible. We will see you next week, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and God bless you.